Hello and welcome to the DrupalCon LA 2015 review. 5 days, 3 summits, 4 keynotes, 9 days of sprints, 16 trainings, 65 exhibitors, 71 sponsors, 83 birds of a feather sessions, 88 presentations, dozens and dozens of volunteers, and about 6,000 attendees made for a great conference. It was also a huge undertaking to cover. I'm Michael Smith. Along with the training and sprints, on Monday there were 3 summits: business, higher ed, and community. As a Drupal meeting organizer, I attended the community summit along with others from the Midwest, Canada, Australia, the Philippines, and other countries. We discussed ways to draw interest, funds, and support events such as meetups, camps, and sprints. Laura Shea has the notes, and I'll post them as soon as they've been edited and published. Community summits were introduced in DrupalCon Prague and were intended to help local organizers run better events, but it was also designed to create a social network to share ideas and identify what works and why. I did not attend any of the BOFs trainings or sprints. I was focused on the presentations, but I did talk to some people. For example, Amy Degnan reported that her Drupal 8 multilingual lab went well, and Kristen Pohl's multilingual therapy lab went well too. John Pugh reported that the Drupal products BOF went well, and Dave Newman reported that the 2 Docker BOFs identified over a dozen related projects. Owen Barton has a great summary of his Visma BOF here. If you look at the link on the presentation notes, you can get that. The keynotes were mostly entertaining. There was dancing, great skits, and a bit about Teresa's hair that was amusing too. Sessions were broken down into 11 categories. And to give you a sense of emphasis, 3 categories were about the front end, and 1 was dedicated to Symfony, the only product to have its own category. One of the best presentations was by WebChick, Angie Byron. She gave the 411 on the state of Drupal 8. At the time of her presentation, the blocking issues were down to 26, and I believe by the end of the conference it was down to 24. And she reminded everyone that Drupal 6 will be completely unsupported once Drupal 8 is released. She also made an appeal for everyone to contribute. Drupal 8 appeals to the modern programmer with the object-oriented constructs such as classes, namespaces, dependency injection. These architectural changes will help people who develop Drupal hire other people with modern development experience. Drupal 8 adds administrative functions that makes life easier for a content creator, manager too. Editing's much easier, done with WYSIWYG tools, which are not part of core. And DevOps is easier too, with configuration, import, export. This is important for upgrades and migrations. All these are long-awaited refinements that most of us expected. Bottom line that Drupal 8 looks better than Drupal 7 because it better integrates views, WYSIWYG, in-place editing, simplified overlays, multilingual, better blocks, features, web services, responsive toolbar, front-end admin, images, and tables. But it's not done. At the end of the conference, there were still a couple dozen blocking issues, which could generate more as we see those addressed. The conference was also a bully pulpit for rallying the attendees to help test and fix the code. They've been smart about what to prioritize. For example, there are currently no Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 migration or upgrade tools, as they have been expected. The market's going to do that, as some of the larger agencies are forced to address the issue by making the product compelling, but don't help build it. They rationalize that the fewer modules are due to the fact that there's more functionality in the core, which precludes their need, and it's all been very well thought out. The next one was front-end architectures. It was a general presentation. Doesn't necessarily have to apply to Drupal even, because there are many pieces to the front end that aren't Drupal. Darwin Young, Wes Ruvalcaba, and Sandy Young talked about the use of front-end tools to master large projects, really large projects. What struck me most about this session was the examples cited: MSNBC, Bravo and Oxygen TV. These are media companies where the user experience is just a new name for programming. The projects are huge and the tools used for just the front ends are extensive. Sass, Grunt, Gulp, Bootstrap, Backbone, jQuery, Node, it goes on and on and on. A dedicated resource is just needed to do the program management of the development resources. But, of course, everybody doesn't need all these. However, many of them are actually part of D8 Core, and some expertise is required just to know the trade-offs of having them available. For example, you may not need jQuery for your client UX, but it may be required for the admin theme. So just a real quick overview without getting deep. Their presentation weighed the pros and cons of adopting, implementing, and supporting tools for development. The obvious bottom line was if you can't support the tools, then you might not want them. On the other hand, if you can support the tools, they can support you and they can give you a lot of leverage. So if you're interested in this, I suggest watching the video instead of looking at the slides. There's not a lot of content in those. The title of this presentation is typical of the speaker, Drupal Theming with Heart. And Morten DK, otherwise known as Morten Birch Heide Jorgensen, is the infamous Drupal 8 UI guru who's taken Drupal out of the PHP world of theming and introduced a new set of tools that define the developer-oriented front-end paradigm. His presentation was classic DK, and he ended by admonishing everyone for not testing and contributing enough to the effort. The packed audience was contrite and appreciative. This highlights the evolution from the current D7 front-end development environment to the next one. Now, what's not evident in this slide is the overall change from the ad hoc nature of Drupal 7 tools to the integrated tools in Drupal 8. Drupal 7 gave developers a great deal of latitude to create themes, often incorporating a great deal of module functionality inside them. Drupal 8 tries to make theming projects more manageable by integrating the development tools, which creates some structure, and creating clearer boundaries between themes and modules. This kind of shows the Morten DK way to do front end. As the problem becomes more complex, so does the solution. And from the perspective of the developer, these are more powerful tools for creating and managing more sophisticated markup. The IDE goes beyond the source editor, and a templating agent offers more theming features than just using PHP. With the new abstraction layer, Sass gives the UI developer a programmatic way to create and manage style sheets. And Compass provides a way to manage authoring CSS, especially in large projects with lots of developers. Some see this as a way of empowering the designer, and others see it as a way to extend the power of the developer. I think both seem to hope this is a way to eliminate the themer. Regardless, it's a new programming environment with new tools and another learning curve. This session, multilingual, is another key part of the core of Drupal 8. And Kristen Pohl and Herc42, an agency up in San Francisco, spent most of the session talking about multilingual in D7 and the use of modules such as I18N. She also explained toward the end how Drupal 8 integrates multilingual in the core. And she really highlighted at the end the distinction of how by integrating multilingual, it obviated the need for a lot of modules, more than might be evident just looking at them. Currently, it takes around 30 contrib modules to effectively use multilingual in Drupal 7. And there are about 200 related D7 modules in total. Drupal 8 makes the key elements a part of core and will make multilingual much easier to implement if you know what you're doing. The current complexity of multilingual is rooted in the organic way that Drupal 7 was built, where each piece could be developed without regard to translation. As a result, elements in every module may need their own multilingual module or modules to get properly translated. Kristen uses 3 buckets to sort the many items. The first two, user interface and content, are obvious. The third, config, is the most insidious. And as you can see here, this slide highlights the key multilingual modules, but these only provide base functionality. Depending upon your application, any one of 200 modules may be needed. Kristen's presentation cites some development examples, and she highlights one using 29 multilingual modules. Part of the Drupal 7 problem was the lack of a design pattern for multilingual. The other part was the lack of a business case for multilingual on many Drupal sites when they were designed, because it was so hard to add multilingual. This is addressed in Drupal 8. This is an overview of the plugin system. Joe Schindler and Lullabot talked about the successor to Hooks plugins. I guess this means Kristen might need to rename her company Hook 42. Plugins are a big change from hooks, but follow a more contemporary programming paradigm. Refer to this link at the bottom of the page for a detailed review of plugins. Perhaps the most significant change to Drupal 8 over Drupal 7 development methodology is the elimination of hooks in favor of plugins. This is far more than just a coding style change. It redefines the way we make and use modules. Plugins are based on the evolution of PHP as it moved from variable functions, hooks, in PHP 4 to classes and an object-oriented programming model in PHP 5. More than a new framework, these are new tools such as Plugin Manager. These changes go to core, which has already begun moving this way in Drupal 7, and fundamentally change key features of Drupal 8, such as migration. See the session Drupal 8 Migration Plugins by Mike Anello, and it'll give you a better idea. This is one of the more entertaining sessions. Blake Hall from Drupalize Me gave a great review of the state of JavaScript in Drupal. He covered everything from jQuery to Backbone to React, with Angular thrown in just for good measure. His explanation of model view whatever is worth the session all in itself. Watch the video instead of reading his slides. That brings up Angular, actually. Travis Tidwell from OpenTech spoke to a large audience on Thursday about a subject that's not becoming part of Drupal 8 core. However, Angular and the single-page architecture, some people refer to as SPA, may have a bigger impact on future Drupal development than anything else at DrupalCon. This was one of the last sessions. While it was of great interest, the audience wasn't sure what to do with it based on the Q&A. With Sass, Compass, Twig, and Symfony, there are now more sophisticated tools for developing the front end. This may be helpful for projects that drive the UI from the server and offer more contemporary needs met, such as mobile first. But be careful what you wish for. There are now ways to build applications that do not use the integrated front end. Drupal 8 can now be a web service, as almost every output can be JSON or Core's HTTP request. This competes more with Couchbase than WordPress, and hints at a future where native mobile apps are the primary target client devices. However, that means more to learn, with front-end tools such as Angular defining the client's user experience, and Drupal being a back-end provider of services such as user authentication, management, content management, and administrative support. This shows Angular and Backbone in the client, and it's not to indicate that they're both going to be residing in a client. I suppose somebody might come up with that strange amalgam. Though you might see Bootstrap used with Angular or Backbone. Bootstrap's providing the responsive design that so many people are looking for in web apps for mobile devices. But I put these in here because Backbone's part of Drupal 8 core, And Bootstrap module's been around a long time. So these things are sort of the established players, where Angular is the new kid on the block. And I wanted to talk about the difference between Angular, JS, and Backbone. Angular is backed by Google. It's more monolithic, but it's got broader support. Backbone by itself is a little more lightweight. It's part of Drupal 8 core. That was planned years ago, actually. It does have dependencies, though, like _JS and jQuery, which effectively make it bigger than Angular. But it's considered to be more flexible. And another interesting piece of this is Node.js, which is forked off to another group called IO.js. I guess Node's got some proprietary connections. I'm not familiar with them exactly. But the interesting thing about Node, it's a JavaScript application that's compiled using Google Chrome's V8. It's not a part of Drupal or anything, but you often see Node.js being used in a way to provide non-blocking response request architecture in the server. You could think of it like Memcached. It's not Drupal really, but it really affects the performance of Drupal. And so I suspect that when you look at Angular and Backbone, you'll see Node.js on the other end. This session was very ad hoc. Nobody had anything prepared material-wise, and so basically a Q&A with Dries, who is the founder of Drupal and the co-founder of Acquia. He's the man. The discussion was interesting, but not newsworthy. Most of the questions were, from the audience were familiar, and Dries passed many of them off to his colleagues. So not much value in this, but of course there's a lot of celebrity factor. Some of the other people who are really key players, particularly in Drupal 8, are Angie Byron. I mentioned her earlier. She's known as Web Chick. Alex Pott, the second to the left. He's the framework manager for Drupal 8. And Jess, who doesn't like to use her last name, is the release manager for Drupal 8. So it was an interesting session, and it was well attended. But this wins the award for best session title. Some fellows from Manatee in San Jose, Costa Rica demonstrated a mobile application using a headless Drupal 7 backend that allowed its citizens to report contraband sales to the government. Costa Rica has high import tariffs, and many people find countless ways around them. The app demonstrates, however, how Drupal could be lightened by offloading features to the client, such as Google Maps, without adding modules to the server. And there were many other sessions. I spent the rest of the night going over them here. The highlights, some of the notable ones, like learning from our launched Drupal 8 customer projects. These are people who've actually implemented Drupal 8 and put them into production while it's still in beta. And to go from one beta to the next beta, there's no migration path. So you pretty much have to figure out how to pull the content, take everything apart, and put it back together again. And I'm sure that's going to be the subject of a number of sessions in the next DrupalCon. There are other sessions, such as on Jenkins. There was a case study on Princess Cruises. Several sessions on Symfony and training to boot. Plus, there was how to run an agency session in the business side, and lightning talks, of course. All the sessions, presentations, and videos can be found at the Drupal website, and there's a URL at the bottom of this slide that'll take you right to it. Next are the exhibits, and this is always fun because you get to see who is making money on Drupal. And rather than go slide by slide through all this, which would take forever, I'm just going to kind of talk over all of them as we go through here and give you some idea of the experience. By most trade show standards, this was a fairly small set of exhibits. As I said, I think there were fewer than 70. And Drupal Association was prominent, including the Drupal wear. You can get your clothes that say Drupal and everything. And then the show was mostly dominated by hosting companies who are providing specialized services. I think the only one that I wouldn't consider to be really focused on Drupal was Microsoft, and that's probably for obvious reasons. But they all had some angle in approaching Drupal, so they had a good story for it. But the most dominant group wasn't really hosting, though they may have been bigger companies in a way, but in numbers, the show is really full of agencies. And I use that word loosely. Some of these companies really might not consider themselves to be agencies, just like some of the hosting companies might not consider themselves to be hosting companies. The big agency, of course, is FFW. They're a result of a merger between ProPeople and Blink. You'll see them here, actually. They're one of our sponsors. And they're an example of just how big Drupal has become from a corporate perspective. There are times that engineering services companies would use Drupal, but would never feature it. Usually the tools that a company uses don't necessarily define its mission or its value proposition to its customers. But Drupal certainly reached the level now where you have businesses that are leveraging the brand equity of Drupal in order to make a business case for themselves. And that was very evident, not only among the agencies, of which there were many here, large ones and small, and they all seem to be doing well, frankly. They're all busy with business, maybe not necessarily at this show because there weren't a lot of end user attendees interested probably in sorting through that at this show, because the conference was so packed. There was very little time to actually go onto the show floor and see what was going on. But what was quite evident was that you had each agency finding a niche for themselves as it related to the way they dealt with their clients, or perhaps the market they went into. There were a number of agencies that, for example, that focused on the government. And they found that there were ways to appeal to the customers related specifically to that. But beyond the agencies, which just on this slideshow just keep going on and on and on, there were other companies featuring services related to agencies. For example, a couple of these things I call agencies were actually software developers who provide mobile services for Drupal. So if you have an agency and you don't specialize in, say, writing mobile apps that call to Drupal because you don't have Android and iOS and Windows mobile developers, you could sub out the work to one of these groups and they could provide their value add in terms of an agency focused on serving another agency. But there are other specialties too, diagnostics, testing, training, consulting, some of the names you recognize in a much bigger forum, and others I didn't even know about. There's one CIT, which was from Brazil, and it's a huge company that not only does Drupal, but many other things. But security was featured. A lot of e-commerce companies were there showing how they could add value. And it was pretty interesting in that all of them knew Drupal well enough to speak to it when you came to the booth, and they explained how they added value to that ecosystem, which was really fascinating in that regard. Beyond that, there were actually 2 booths with end users, and that we're coming up to that. And I didn't even get to speak to the people in one booth because they didn't seem to be there very often. which was examiner.com, and that is an online news publication that people can contribute to. And the other was Princess Cruises. Princess Cruises actually participated in a session, and they talked about how they use Drupal for their website, their corporate website, and how they've used it to manage all their content and their customers. And that leads us to the attendees. There were a lot of them, and I didn't get to meet almost all of them, unfortunately. As you can see, a lot of them are in this picture, and if you look closely, I'm right there. Don't squint too hard, but there I am. And how this looked from my perspective was like this. So you can, if you click on the URL at the bottom of the slide, you can get a real dynamic perspective of what went on to take this picture. I found it fascinating. It was a lot of fun. Now, you don't have to just take my word for it. There are a lot of DrupalCon reports. I've listed a few here. There's the Twitter feed, and you can go back and rehash that. Mendel Curlin, who works for GoDaddy out of Austin, Texas, gave a nice summary. He's very familiar with WordPress, and he gave a WordPress perspective on DrupalCon. And there are a couple others by Juan and Shiva from their perspective, and they looked at it differently than I did, and I would think that you would get some value out of checking them out as well. So the bottom line on DrupalCon is Drupal 8. The whole show is pretty much devoted to it, and I think it really does a lot for Drupal. I really think it gives a new life for Drupal because of the architecture being more contemporary. It's really important. Drupal 8 adds functionality and tools that move it more toward web development products like Adobe Muse. And many of the BOFs and meetups over the past 5 years, those features were front and center topics. So once again, be careful what you wish for. This is by no means Muse, but Muse's influence is apparent in some of the D8 priorities. However, to get these improvements without turning Drupal 8 into some Wix-like thing, Drupal 8 has become different. These differences allow Drupal 8 to take on more ambitious projects and address more diverse needs such as mobile clients and web services. The new complexities of this added sophistication require more expertise in new areas of development, such as mobile applications, heterogeneous multi-site web applications, and cross-platform web services for the Internet of Things, which some people talked about. For agencies such as Acquia and FFW, Drupal 8 provides a lot of leverage as they can afford to grow specialties within their large organizations. For small shops, this will challenge the team that's developed core competencies in soon-to-be deprecated development methodologies, such as hooks and theming. It challenges them to change, teach an old dog new tricks and hire new blood for new specialties. Drupal 7, on the other hand, is going to be around for a long time, and there will be plenty of opportunities to sell upgrade services to Drupal 7 clients. In this regard, there's no rush for those who have steadily grown and are looking to continue to do the same with their business. Bottom line, you can be sure that Drupal is not going away. Thank you all, and I appreciate your time.